It's my pleasure to welcome to the Today's Leader podcast, the podcast for the leaders and entrepreneurs of today. We have Deborah Peters from that wonderful place in Los Angeles. How are you, Deborah?
I am great. Thank you for having me, Tony. I'm excited about this.
I'm really excited about it. I've been doing some research and reading some of your content and watching some of your videos, so I know that we're going to have a really good conversation. But first up, I'm going to talk about something you spoke about in a recent video to your followers, where you shared this statement: given my childhood, I should be a statistic today. So tell me a little bit about you and how you've come to be where you are today.
Well, they say what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. But, it's been, I think there's this thing in me that just won't let me stop becoming more of me. And I don't know how else to explain it than that. There are times where I've felt like giving up, just like everybody else. And, there's been times where I've been doing the pity party and licking my wounds. And I just gave myself permission to do that. But then I said, okay, once you hit this certain limit, then you got to pivot and bootstrap and get back in the saddle because there's more to create.
Absolutely. So your background was not so I'd imagine your childhood was quite challenging.
Yeah, it was, I don't even know where to begin with that. I mean, my parents really struggled with some deep-rooted poverty and scarcity beliefs, and I think that was a generational thing coming out of the Second World War. My dad was a POW, and he basically came home broken, and there just weren't tools or even terminology to address that, and it broke our family apart. It fragmented us, and he died when I was 7, and we just never really pulled together,
Yeah.
So it became all about a lot of criticism and just lack and I think jealousy and competition, the crab theory, like nobody's ever going to get ahead, and you just this is your caste that you're into, and you just never break free of that. And I never bought any of it. There was something in me that said none of this is true, and I would challenge them on it, which really didn't turn out very well. And so finally I just said, I think I just better move. I think I need some different geography, put some space between us so I can get after what I need to do to expand myself and figure out what to do with my talent and my gifts, because I didn't know what to do with that.
Yeah, congratulations on that. So many people get caught up in that scarcity mindset, as you'd know. And you'd be working with, I'd imagine, a number of people who are just, what's in it for me, or that's mine and I can't share. And the concept of abundance is somehow not even in so many people's thinking. So I think that is an incredibly powerful story for people, that no matter how you were brought up, there's always a way forward. There's always that, whether we call it a line in the sand or just that change of thinking that says, I can be better than this, I can do this, I'm not buying into that. I love that concept. So you've become experienced in and educated in so many ways. Business strategy, neuroscience, don't we love stuff about the brain?
Yeah.
It just fascinates me. And I like the way that you utilize it from a practical sense. So share me what got you interested in those areas, and what compelled that level of research and expertise?
So I had a couple of turning points. When I was in my 20s, I owned a fitness club, and I trained professional athletes, mostly hockey players. And then it was a tricky market because it was sort of a small city, kind of in a rural area. And, you know, people worked hard. They worked the land, they worked, you know, construction and oil and gas. And the last thing, I mean, it was a tough sell. Now you need to come to my gym and work out.
Yeah.
So I went after some of the local contracts, you know, the police department for their officers to have a membership, and the fire department. And that really inspired something in me about how you just have to have a vision. And so when we expanded the fitness club into this 2-story building, I had this idea to put in a licensed lounge so that, you know, people would have somewhere to maybe in their off time just come by and hang out. And so I had to challenge the city council, and then I had to challenge the liquor board, and it worked. And, you know, these things compound in you where you're like, whoa, that actually worked. Well, what else is possible, you know? So between that and working with the athletes and seeing how it really wasn't about their physical that made the difference, it was the connection between their head and their heart that transferred into physical performance. So now I've got this mishmash of business possibilities and growth with all of this, you know, mind-body connection stuff. And let me tell you, like, Tony, that was back in the day when nobody talked about this stuff, you know?
Yeah.
It just like, what? What are you talking about? Mind-body? So after many years of that path and just struggling to make ends meet because of, first of all, I was ahead of my time. And secondly, I was in, you know, they say location. Well, I was in a location that wasn't really conducive to a fitness club. And so I decided to sell it and to move on. And it was just at the perfect timing because I really wanted to get on stages and be a speaker. And so that's the direction I went with it.
Wow. And that sense of achievement is, I still get fascinated in the way I respond when something goes right on my plan, that I've worked hard, I've achieved something. And, you know, some of the very simple things like making sure my pool's nice and clear. And I'll go out there and I'll just look at it, and it's just, sometimes it's just so hard to understand why you feel the way you do, but it's about the work that you put in, it's about seeing the end result, and just that sense of satisfaction is amazing. So you opened a fitness centre in a not ideal situation, because I'm sort of thinking that would have done wonders in the streets of Hollywood or something,
right.
And, you know, have the beautiful people coming in. But and then the challenge to build a business from that was really, really clear. So tell me about, I guess, the last couple of years. I mean, I'm not a big fan of talking about COVID, but I am a big fan and a big encourager around how we recover out of COVID. So, you know, we talk about 2020 being a challenging year. You talked to me offline about some restrictions are starting to lift where you are. So up until now, I guess 2021 has looked pretty similar to what 2020 presented to us in many parts of the world. And I guess also, Deborah, disproportionately the pain has been felt not necessarily at the big end of town, but at the smaller and medium end of town, and in certain industries and in certain individuals. I would really welcome your thoughts, and I know this is a big part of where you work with people. I'd really welcome your thoughts on some individual strategies on the way forward for some of these, the leaders and entrepreneurs of today, or the people that have been affected in industries that didn't see this coming.
Absolutely. Well, the first thing is I believe that small to mid-sized companies are the way forward, whether it's in America, whether it's in Australia, or any part of the world. And you know, they've long been the backbone of the American economy, and that is never more true than it is now. I think one of the benefits we're going to see coming out of this is the colossal divide between the big box companies that thrived and cleaned up and made billions, and then all of these small companies and mom-pop shops and even some mid-sized companies just, they couldn't sustain to get through it.
Yeah.
We see that now more clearly than ever. And, you know, it's like I said in the beginning of the interview, you know, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And this has actually, I think, become, you know, the Great Awakening, where people are having to really look within. You know, if there's a benefit, the benefit was there was a lack of external stimulation. You know, there was really nowhere to go where you could just kind of avoid your problems. You know, you couldn't go to the pub, there wasn't a pub open, you couldn't go to the club and go salsa dancing. They're just, you know, those things weren't available. So what are you going to do? You had to look inside. And when people went inside far enough that they realized, wait a minute, I really have a life that I want to create for myself, and it's beyond that 9 to 5 that I thought was the right thing for me, because that's what I was told I was supposed to do. I was supposed to go to college in an industry that would pay a lot so I could live this carved out dream that really wasn't fulfilling. And now these people are looking at their lives and saying, there are things I want to do with my life. There's I want to create. I want to give back to humanity. And so the place for all of this comes through small to mid-sized companies. Nothing makes a greater impact on a community than businesses that are contributing to the community. You know, it's not the big box store that is sponsoring Little League. It's the small to mid-sized company that's putting the money back into the communities. I believe that there's something that's being awakened there, like in the hearts of business leaders in that framework that is now on a new growth trajectory. And I think it's just starting to get traction. So I'm talking about this all the time. You know, whether you've been in business for 6 months or 60 years, you know, I work with some companies that are multi-generational. Go take a look at your business model and your values, because I promise you they need to be updated. And then from that will come like a new, fresh enthusiasm and inspiration for the next part of the journey. Yeah.
What I've found, and it's interesting, you talk about that. This morning there was a statistic shared here in Australia at the business breakfast that I mentioned to you off air, that 98% of employment comes out of that small to medium sector, but only 33% of the GDP is there. So you can see the disproportionate levels of income in what we would say the big end of town, and then predominantly the ones that are the heart and soul of every community. One of the things that I saw very early in the piece is that people with a bad business model really just had no chance. I mean, it wasn't necessarily the time for them to be rejigging or doing pivots or being agile, because fundamentally their business model was flawed anyway. So we saw a lot of that, what I would call natural. So they may have closed down over the next 2 years, but fundamentally COVID meant that they were gone in 4 months. So, but the ownership of businesses is something that I see, that people that accepted the reality that surrounded them was able to look at it with some level of clarity, understand the things that they had in control and what they could do, are the ones that have posted some positive outcomes moving through the process. So whether it's they shifted more online, or they I saw some of our cafes in my local area, for example, they were shut, but they started delivering product, as in free product, to people that couldn't afford it. So they had a stockpile of inventory, they had a stockpile of their food. So they were cooking up stuff and delivering it out, and just doing via Facebook, people that were in need of some help. So I saw this real community spirit. And where I am, on the Redlands coast here in just southeast of Brizzy, we've got a real bent around our community. We really want to grow our business community, and we don't have the big end of town here. Our biggest employer is the local council, but fundamentally the business community gets in there and supports each other. So, but in those areas, I guess, where that's not necessarily the case, what are some of the things that you would suggest to a business owner to drive that connection with community? Because I'd also imagine there'd be a range of business owners that don't see the need or that they should be doing that. So what's some of the influence that you could share in how you can generate that sort of level? And I love that concept of the Great Awakening, by the way, Deborah. I love it. So so what's the challenge there in awakening small to business owners, small to business medium? I'm stuffing my words around. But the owners of small to medium business enterprises to really embrace that concept of community as their way forward?
It comes from a mindset shift. I feel that businesses are, the odds are kind of stacked against them from a paradigm perspective from the get-go because, we hear all of these statistics about how so many businesses fail, and the number one cause of business failure is under capitalism, and it's hard to get money, and we hear all of the cons, so to speak. But what never really gets talked about is that the business is really an extension of you. You are the business, and the leadership team is the business. So the mindset of the people that are making the decisions has to really be tuned up in order to have the wherewithal, the insight, to be able to reach into the community and to create some kind of energy flow. Because at the end of the day, that's really what we're talking about, is there's like a disconnect energetically between who's leading and the business offerings and the community. You have to first shift how you view your business. If you view your business as a struggle, guess what? You're going to have lots of opportunity to fulfill that viewpoint. And so when you look at a business, regardless what size it is, whether I'm working with a small company that's got maybe 100 employees, or if it's a mid-sized company, it doesn't matter. The energy comes from a place of possibility. So you have to expect to win, first of all, and when you go into it, make sure that there's a level of alignment with what it is that you're creating, because creativity is not just for the arts. As a business leader, you have to be very creative. You have to know how to maneuver around choke points. You have to know when to let go of people or a product or a service. You have to know when. I just finished a coaching call with a construction company, and he needs 4 new people, and he was beating himself up about taking this risk of hiring. And so we just ran through, like, where were you last year at this time? And he goes, well, I didn't know if we were going to survive. And I said, and where are you now? You're looking to hire 4 new people. With the complexity of growth comes the complexity of problems, and in the right mindset, when you embrace that, then it's something to rejoice about, because it's such a good problem to have,
Full agreement there. That concept around mindset is just absolutely the way we look at things. I'm always reminded of Laura Goodrich in her book Seeing Red Cars. It's we have this tendency to get what we focus on. We get what we focus on, but often we focus on what we don't want. So we end up with the things we don't want, e.g. problems, concerns, issues, stress, as opposed to focusing on what we actually want. And so there's a really good example once again, Deborah. So.
Yeah, and if I could, when we are unconscious about how we're running our mind, then we will focus on our problems and what we don't want, almost by default. We're not aware we're doing it. So then what happens is we get more of what we don't want, because of course where focus goes, energy flows, right? And then when we get more of what we don't want, then we because we're unconscious of how we've created this for ourselves, we have a tendency to kind of throw our hands in the air and think the odds are stacked against us. That it's some external thing that's causing the choke point or blocking us, and really that's not true at all. And therein lies the demise of most businesses. And you just have to realize that your energy is a powerful, powerful tool.
Yeah. I was speaking with a lady in my network just the other day, and she was sharing with me that she gets up every morning, has done so for probably the last 20 years, and she shares with herself, and it's a particular process of, she says a certain phrase 21 times before she gets out of bed, and really trying to set that intention for the day about who she is and how powerful she is, and all of those things. And a lot of people would listen to that and think, oh, that's woo-woo. How's that going to change my life? So how did someone actually who may be caught in that mindset where they're looking at the issues and they're looking at the challenges, instead of potentially looking at the hope or the promise or the potential of or the opportunities that may present, how do you work with someone to help that process?
Well, there's a few ways. If necessary, I'll do some repatterning work with them so that we can basically create and build up some bandwidth on a new pattern that is designed toward what they want. Because essentially it's just really all about repetition, somewhere between 3, 7, and 21 repetitions, and you've created a new habit. When you attach emotion to that habit of thinking, then it deepens and it starts to take on a life of its own. So I remember in the beginning, I used to do a lot of personal breakthrough sessions with people, and I would spend the bulk of my time sort of like trying to root out the limiting beliefs or whatnot. And I don't really do that level of work anymore because it's so much quicker and easier to just install a new pattern of thought. And then when you marry that with the feeling, this is the part that most people miss. They visualize and they might say affirmations, but then the results are really slow in coming because they haven't connected to the feeling. The feeling is everything. Feeling is everything.
It's that the emotional connection continues to drive your daily disciplines that keeps your intention in place in so many ways. And it's interesting, you talked about your coaching a little bit about how you look to decode some behaviours, I guess would be a way that I'd be thinking about that, trying to imprint those new patterns. One of the things that how I work with my clients is I imagine that they're in a hole, and many times other coaches may be standing around that hole trying to lift them up from outside the hole, saying, I've got a better way, come with me, let me help you. And my concept is I'm jumping in the hole with them so I can get a really in-depth understanding of their current positioning and how, not necessarily how they got there, but just where they are.
Right.
And then, okay, now that we're in this hole together, how do we get out of this hole? So it's and in many ways it is about setting up those new pathways. It's about setting up the decoding behavior.
So that's I like that because it's very relatable, first of all, where you now can completely relate to the way they're feeling, so that you're never going to minimize the struggle they feel, because when people feel struggle, the struggle is real, right?
Yeah.
And I think, on many levels, I probably do something very similar because of my past because of my upbringing. And I had a child when I was 15, and I was a single mom, and I know what it's like to have loss and abandonment and all of those things that come with whatever a client could be experiencing. So, there can be I think what you're saying is you have a great level of compassion, and with that compassion, they connect, your heart connects to their heart, and they're like, yeah, we can do this.
And that rapport, that connection, that emotional piece is really, really important for when we're working so close and in many ways so intimately with people, that it's really important that you've got to step away from that place of judgment or thinking that my way's the right way. It's about how you work within the confines of that relationship and help them see the way forward for them. So I think there's some real similarities there. So to get to where you are, so there's obviously been some internal inspiration, which is amazing, some internal strength that has enabled you to overcome what may have been a powerful detriment in terms of your childhood and conditioning. But what who's inspired you in your journey outside of obviously yourself? Who's been your inspiration to tackle what you take on?
I really look to the old school greats,
Okay.
So my first turning point, my wake-up call, was Louise Hay's book, You Can Heal Your Life. And when I read that book, I was like, I had no idea that there was something else could be created. So then it was just from there an insatiable appetite. So some of the ones that I've really stuck with over the years and come back to, whenever we're going through a sticky point, I always say to people, just go back to the basics, right? Because the basics always work. So Florence Scovel Shinn, back at the turn of the century, not this one, but the other one, and Wallace D. Wattles.
Yeah.
Florence Scovel Shinn wrote The Game of Life and How to Play It.
Yeah.
And a bunch of others. And Wallace D. Wattles wrote The Science of Getting Rich.
Yeah.
And then I would say Charles Hannell, very old school, he wrote The Master Key. So, that's where I came from. I came from real old school, fun, basic, And it's interesting because one time a client said to me, well, have you heard of The Secret? And I hadn't. And she thought I was like, wow, had no credibility suddenly, right? And so I said, well, what is it? So she started telling me about it, and I was like, that's like a watered down version of the stuff I've studied for like decades,
Yeah.
So, I like that stuff.
It's really interesting, isn't it, that nothing really is new or groundbreaking, even in terms of some of the research in relation to neuroscience, for example, and neuro leadership. It's really, in many ways, just confirming what some of the ancient philosophers were sharing with us, and they certainly didn't have the advantages of the research institutes that are available today, but what is old just keeps continually getting, I suppose, in many ways rehashed. And I'm always interested when I'm working with someone who starts sharing that, there's this new theory or this is out there, or, and because you can always see whatever it is that they've pointed you to, that there's resemblances somewhere back in the chain. So someone's just taken a concept, done some more work on it, maybe dived into it a little bit stronger, but there's sometimes there's nothing better than just going back there and reading some of that. Really, some of those people that you mentioned are completely new to me, but I'll be doing some research around them now. But so tell me then, so in many ways we've almost, in some instances, we've seen glaring examples where leadership has been voided in the current environment, where we haven't necessarily seen the leadership that we probably deserved or that we probably expected, whether it's corporate, whether it's political. There's numerous, probably far too many to go through and provide examples for. So when we're looking at leadership for today, Deborah, what are some of the traits that you believe are really integral for a leader today to be effective and develop a really good, strong performance culture, and I suppose bring people along for the journey? What are some of those traits that you're seeing that you believe a leader needs to have?
Well, I think, first of all, we have to redefine the term leader. I think the terminology leader and leadership doesn't mean what it used to. And certainly, to re-language anyone that's in politics is not a leader, they're a servant. And so we really don't have world leaders, we have world servants. And if they're not serving humanity, I always believe that anything a leader does within an organization, whether your team is just you or, thousands or millions, because you're in a seat of authority in a country, it always has to increase choice. And so first of all, we need to redefine the term leadership. Secondly, those leaders have a responsibility to always be in alignment with their higher self. And that means they have to have done some work on themselves. They can't be trying to run an organization or a country or a continent or a union from an ego. And that's really what we've been experiencing. And as you can see with the Great Awakening, that is crumbling, because it's glaringly obvious what that's really been about all along. It's self-serving, it's corruption, it has no good intentions in mind for the people. And so I think that's where we really have to start. If I'm working with a company leadership team, one of the things I insist they do is they learn how to meditate. And I've taken entire leadership teams through a guided meditation at the beginning of a strategy session before we start anything, just to get them out of their ego and to get them into their heart space where all goodness is created from. All solutions to any growth problem, any talent issue, any market share hiccup, all will come from being in, connecting the head with the heart. The ego just wants to throw money at it, or chop off heads and fire people, and or maybe go out and hire some big gun to come in and fix everything, and it never works. And then the people that are really doing the work are where are they? We don't know.
Yeah. That's I was picturing some of the leadership teams that I have worked with in my corporate days, and I'm just imagining the responses that they would have had if a consultant or a trainer or an expert had come into a session and said, okay, before we do anything, we're going to walk through a guided meditation. And that's because of that whole concept that I've worked with some pretty big egos in my time as leaders, and I could just imagine that allowing that to happen and being vulnerable about it would have been a real challenge for some people. So that's, I'd love to see that. If you've got a video of that, please share.
I don't think they'd let me.
No.
But yes, and I finesse it. I warm them up, and sometimes I'll take them there without them realizing it, and then pretty soon their eyes are droopy and everybody's meditating for 15 minutes.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, the closest I've ever come to that is when we do visioning exercises, and I really want I get them to close their eyes, but even then you'll always have the one person who's crossed his arms and keeps his eyes open.
I know.
So it's always a male too, just quietly. So I don't know what that
It's
says about the male
funny.
species.
It's so funny.
So tell me then, so your journey hasn't been like a smooth, straight line to success. You've overcome some amazing challenges. So tell me about how you deal with those troughs that we inevitably face in our journey.
So I suppose my number one fallback has always been my workouts, you know.
Okay.
Sometimes to a fault, you know. Sometimes I think I probably worked out too much to avoid. You know, maybe people would drink alcohol. I would just go for a run or go lift some weights or go to a fitness class of some sort. Because of the endorphins are incredible. You know, you just never get a hangover from your endorphins. And then the more I pursued personal growth and reading some of those books, putting into practice some of the exercises, I realized that my workouts were really like an active meditation, you know? Because back then I didn't know how to sit down and meditate. It's only been probably the last 5 years that I've been actively doing that. So for most of my life, I think when I would work out, I would get into this zone. And I started having to carry a notepad with me because I'd come up with ideas. So I could go into a workout in a total funk and come out high on life. And, you know, that's why I stayed so consistent with it, because I could maintain that. But there were periods of time, I remember there was a point where for probably about 2 years, I just literally, I don't know if I had like chronic fatigue or something labeled like that, but I just couldn't function. I was just burned out, you know, from resistance. Look, we are hardwired to thrive. We are designed as human beings to be happy, to thrive, to create. And when we hold ourselves back with negative self-talk, you know, being hard on ourselves, not letting ourselves enjoy life, and cutting ourselves off from good people or good experiences, you know, it can really wreak havoc on your body, on your cells, and it drives down your immune system. And I went through that experience, and just, I think for so long, I did have quite the roller coaster life where I was like pretty low, pretty high, pretty low, pretty high. And I was really seeking the middle ground. What I learned from that is to catch myself, to be more self-aware, like to pay attention, to be an observer of what I was doing to myself through my thoughts, through my self-talk, you know, the conversation in your head. And I started to catch myself before I went down too far. And then pretty soon it like leveled out. And once you can maintain yourself, you don't want to ever feel bad again. You know, you see where you start to put yourself there. You know, we all have a bad day. Anybody can have a bad day. The thing is when you're having that bad day, to be cognizant, to be present enough to say to yourself, why am I beating myself up here? I don't need to be having this bad of a day. So you can turn it on a dime. And I self-taught that because I didn't like feeling bad.
Excellent. Excellent. Self-care is so important, and having healthy coping skills is incredibly important. And the more the world talks about mental health, I think there's a lot of positives in that. But what we're not talking about in many ways, Deborah, is exactly what you've just talked about. How do I cope? How do I deal with it? How do I work through this? Because at the end of the day, in so many ways, life is going to provide stress and pressures on us for us to become the diamond that we're supposed to be.
Get polished up.
And yeah, and you know, the ability for us to be able to say, yeah, I know this is really challenging what I'm doing right now. I know that. And at the end of this, I'm going to go for a run. I'm going to do this. I'm going to get my endorphins kick. And, you know, and I suppose what we see in the world is many people will just turn to that concept of, well, I'll have a beer and that'll bring me down. Or
turn on the television.
You know, yeah, and, you know, those healthy coping skills is what's going to help everyone. So that's a really good, what you've just talked about is fantastic. So thank you. So for yourself going forward, what's the vision? What does that look like? What does Deborah Peters look like in 5 years' time?
You know, it's interesting you asked that. I feel that finally hit a tipping point in my awareness of that. And I look back like 20 years ago, and I had this little studio apartment above a garage in this backyard of this estate. It was really cool because it had tons of windows and tons of trees, and you know, I was just steeped in Mother Nature. And I went to the art store and I bought this large like paper that came on a roll, and I covered was one whole wall. And I started mapping all these things I was going to do and create. And you know, and then life happened. And that life that was happening was just me moving beyond old belief systems and old triggers, you know, where I would get emotionally triggered and brought down by something external, but really it was something in me that I hadn't been aware of, you know, and there's the journey. So, you know, here I am now, and it's like a perfect storm. You know, I've got 2 books on the go. One is written and ready for an editor, and the other one, because of COVID, I did a rewrite on, and I need to, you know, jump back into that one. And we're launching some really cool stuff. I've got a health coaching platform we're launching that is going to be handled by a team of master health coaches that I've onboarded. And then I'm going to do some special mind-body connection trainings with those people and that are our clients. And, you know, it's just really building an empire, and it's huge because I've already been working globally for 20 years in 17 countries. So I already have followings and contacts in many industries and many countries. And, you know, the foundation is already there. So there's a lot.
That's exciting.
Yes. Yeah. And, you know, the next thing on the agenda is to create an online platform where no matter what your socioeconomic situation is, you can get this information.
Excellent. Yeah. Excellent. Greater good community. I can see it all rolling in there, which is awesome. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that I should have asked you? So this is your chance to jump on a soapbox and share your most passionate thought or your most purposeful reason for being. So,
well, yeah, there might be a couple of things. So one of the things I'd like to address is this false premise about men and women in business and how we're so different. Because we're really not. And one of the questions I get asked a lot by women is, and men too now, you know, how do I find balance in my career? And my answer is, there is no balance. You know, this notion of balance, I mean, how bad do you want what you want, and how big is the thing you want will determine your ability to create balance. Because if you're, you know, if you look at any massive achiever, they probably didn't have any balance at all. It was just full on, you know, focused, dialed in, and the things that they were creating, they were obsessed with. You know, it's a healthy obsession, but they were obsessed with it. So I would just invite everyone to cut themselves some slack about trying to do it all. It's why we have a service industry where people like to do things that you don't have time to do.
Yeah.
And I think too, the other thing is just that whatever your story is, just realize that the story you tell is the life you create. So if you tell a story that some other person, because of some characteristic, has it easier than you, then you will always struggle. So I just feel like we all have to come to this realization that we all create our own reality, and we have to be accountable to the story we tell. And if the story you tell is not giving you the results you want, you best start telling a different story.
Excellent. And once again, great advice. And it's interesting when you were talking about that obsessed person that's hyper successful, because from the outside looking in, we're the ones probably saying they've got no balance in life, and that person probably is thinking that their life is perfect because they're working on what they've got passion for, what they see as their purpose. And maybe in hindsight they look back and say, my God, maybe working 19 hours a day wasn't the way to go. But during that time, they probably believe that they've got some balance. So and once again, that individual perspective. So fantastic. How can people connect with you, Deborah?
So my Instagram is at NEI, the number 4, and then change. As is my LinkedIn and my Facebook. We are just about to relaunch the website. It's neimind.com. Someone decided to hack it in March and took the whole thing down and put it in the trash and permanently deleted it. So most of it's been restored. There's a few edits that need to be done, but that's the best way to reach me.
Excellent. Deborah, it's been a pleasure speaking with you today. Thank you for taking the time to invest in the leaders and entrepreneurs of today. I really do appreciate our conversation.
Me too, and thank you for having me. It's been a blessing.